counties. This is a 90-minute program, so we will be ending at 1:30 p.m. today. And our program today is being co-sponsored by the Alameda County Bar Association, the Contra Costa County Bar Association, the ADR section of the Alameda and Contra Costa counties, and the CCCBA litigation section. My name is Bob Jacobs, and this year I'm the chair of the Contra Costa County ADR section, Contra Costa County Bar Association ADR section, and the co-chair of the Alameda County Bar Association ADR section. We have with us today Jamie Herron of the CCCBA litigation section, who is also co-sponsoring this program, and we want to thank her for joining us today. We have with us Gary Sanders, who is on the ADR executive committee of the Alameda County Bar Association ADR section. And Gary will be monitoring questions submitted by chat and coordinating them with our moderator, Judge Wynne Carvill. So please submit your questions today using the chat feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. And the intention is to address questions as the program goes forward. So you don't need to hold your questions to the end. Just enter them in chat and Gary will pick up on them. If you should encounter technical difficulties, then if you're already in the session, you can send a chat to Saeed, S-A-E-E-D, and he'll address it. Sometimes people have been known to be bounced out of webinars, and this actually is not a webinar, it's a large meeting, but if you're bounced out of the meeting or if you end up stuck in the waiting room, then email Saeed and he will address it. And I'll read his email address twice. His email address is S as in Sam, A-E-E-D @acba.net. Once again, S as in Sam, A-E-E-D @acba.net. And if that doesn't work, then call my cell phone at 925-337-2800. 925-337-2800. This program is being recorded, and so it will be available afterwards. This is through Alameda County Bar Association. And just one moment here. We are pleased to have with us today 3 judges from Alameda and Contra Costa counties. We have Wynne Carvill, who is the recently retired presiding judge of Alameda County, and he'll be our moderator today. Judge Carvill served on the Alameda County Superior Court from 2003 through 2019. He served as presiding judge in 2018 and 2019, and he was supervising judge of civil and in a complex litigation department for 4 years. Before that, he served in criminal, family, and direct civil assignments, as well as a settlement judge. Since his retirement at the end of last year, he has been with JAMS in San Francisco as an arbitrator and mediator. We also have the Honorable Stephen K. Austin, who served as a trial judge on the Superior Court in Contra Costa since 1998. He's currently the supervising judge of the Civil Department in Martinez. He has served as a branch court supervising judge and as a member of the court's executive committee. He was presiding judge in Contra Costa County in 2015 and 2016. We also have with us the Honorable Brad Seligman, who was appointed to the Alameda County Superior Court in 2012. And he has been the supervising judge of civil complex asbestos since 2016 and is the acting civil supervising judge. He's a member of the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission, the Judicial Council Civil and Small Claims Advisory Committee, Vice Chair, Civil Law Curriculum Committee, Judicial Council Center for Judicial Education and Research. He was a founding and executive director of the Impact Fund in 1994 through 2010, Senior Counsel 2011 of Counsel Lewis Feinberg Lee, Renneker and Jackson in 2012, Managing Partner Saperstein, Seligman, Maeda, and Larkin, Senior Law Clerk to Honorable Lawrence K. Carlton. He earned his JD from Hastings College of the Law. So welcome, Judges Carvill, Austin, and Seligman.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I thought this would be a great panel to have. And to put it in perspective, having just left the court at the end of last year, I feel like I got off the train just in time before it went around the curve and had an unfortunate accident. I've just been amazed. It was difficult figuring out how to run courts before COVID-19, and I'm just in awe of what the courts have struggled with and the solutions they've come up with. And I thought it'd be helpful to the bar to have these two judges, each who run civil in different counties, talk about a series of questions. Because one of the things you'll all see is that courts have common problems, but they all have different infrastructures, different employee issues, all sorts of differences that make the appropriate response in each county sometimes different. And so I thought that having two judges on to talk about COVID-19 from different counties might provide the bar with some perspective on the kinds of differences that courts face when and have to deal with when dealing with a common problem, which is COVID-19. So I thought I'd start out by asking each judge, what is the biggest impact on COVID-19 in your county in terms of civil trials? So I don't think we'd agree. Does Judge Austin want to go first? And what's the biggest challenge? And then we'll hear the Alameda version of that question.
Well, the biggest challenge still is that our doors are still pretty much locked. All the courtroom doors in civil departments, we're not having any in-person, really any. There's some exceptions, but pretty much 100% no in-person appearances. Everything's by pretty much all by court call, although we do some Zoom too on some areas, and I'll talk about that as we go on. It's been really weird as a judge sitting out there and then with an empty courtroom. Mine has all these little papers up about chairs you're not supposed to sit in because of social distancing. So when I look out, I just see every third chair is open and the rest have these "don't sit here" things on them through all in the jury room, a jury box, and out in the gallery. And it's kind of depressing. I miss seeing everybody. And I know the other civil judges too. It changes the way that we work, just like it changes the way that you guys are working every day. So I know how difficult that must be. We're keeping them locked because for a couple of reasons. One is, the main one really is for safety of everybody. So if you don't have to come down to the court, it's best for everybody to stay away. It's one of those kind of places where lots of people congregate and you could pass the virus pretty easily. Also, though, a big reason is because of COVID, we've had impacts in other areas, especially in criminal. And the security force, our bailiffs, are needed for more of the transporting of criminal defendants from the jail and monitoring them, because they can't be all in one big room anymore like they used to be in a holding pen or something ready to come into court. They've got to be spread out. So it takes more people to transport them around on many of the calendars that are going on. So we've tried to help out in other areas by not having them here. And since we don't have any bailiff or security, it's hard for us to open the doors. A couple of areas, though, that are still open or we've opened and they're working well is one is Judge Birch's department that does limited jurisdiction cases primarily, and our commissioners who do the small claims, civil harassment, unlawful detainer cases. They're open to the public, mostly because they're just about all self-represented litigant calendars, at least on one side. Down with the commissioners, it's almost entirely self-represented litigants, and it was just too difficult to run the calendar with everything on remote with people that are already unfamiliar with the processes. So those are the two big ones. So one more big one. This is the second biggest. I know you said first, but the impact's been in the clerk's office. The clerk's office, it's very difficult down there because they don't have very much space to work in. Many of the employees have small kids. There have been some family leave issues we're having because of budget cuts in the court. And I know Alameda's been really affected by those. We don't have any furloughs, but we kind of have a hiring freeze. So there are some positions that are left unfilled down there. And we have other weird things down there that you wouldn't think of. We have a group called the Futures, who are developmentally disabled adults who do assisted work, and they're wonderful. And they open all our mail. Civil gets almost all the mail. And so they're not here to open it anymore. And it's really very difficult. We've had to put a couple of employees on just going through all of the mail and sorting it and figuring out where it's supposed to go, because there's so much of the work is coming in by mail now instead of in person. And that's because it's hard to get into our clerk's office because it's so small. So we only let a couple of people in at a time down there. The lines are really long. The messengers are really waiting for hours and hours to get in with big stacks of papers, and there's only one window for them. And it's very difficult to do things in person. So everything's coming in the Dropbox and on mail, and that's caused a backlog because it's harder to sort things that way, as opposed to when it's at the window, they could just file it, stamp it, and get it entered pretty quickly into the computer system. And now it takes a lot longer, and they're having to go through papers, and things are getting kind of mixed up and lost. So we're having a hard time getting some of our motion papers on time. So that's a big impact, and it has ramifications over a lot of different areas.
Judge Seligman, is that similar, or are there differences in Alameda County in terms of the COVID challenge?
Well, similar and different, but I have to say, I have to laugh, when you said you got off the train right before it went into the wreck. I got on the train right during the wreck. I got a phone call 1 week before the court closed down saying, congratulations, you're now the civil supervisor. And a couple weeks later, I called one of my predecessors and said, what's in the job description? And it turned out I'm doing absolutely nothing that's in the job description of a civil supervisor. What I'm doing is recreating from the ground up how we actually operate in a Zoom universe. So it's kind of a wild and weird experience going forward. And there's nobody to call to say, hey, how do you do this? Because nobody did it before. So it's an interesting experience all in all. The similarities, the most important similarities, which is probably worse here than Contra Costa, is the staffing problem. We've had huge shortages in staff, partly because of COVID itself, partly because of parents of school-age children, partly because people who get sick and the like. And then, of course, now with the budget cutbacks, all the courts got hit with budget cutbacks. And the result is we're running 20, 30% below capacity in our clerk, both backroom and departmental clerks, which has effects all across the line. And Steve talked about some of them. We're one of those modern courts that don't have e-filing. As I like to say, we have the best technology of 1990. And that's
We've got 1980, so we beat you.
Okay, well, I may be, I'm probably puffing when I say 1990. But it means every document that gets filed has to be scanned. And with the shortages of staff, it means the time that you file a document, that it finally gets into the record of action so a judge can look at it, depending on where, is anywhere from 3 days to 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the priority of the document that's there. And that, of course, has led to many problems. We often don't get to see the reply briefs in cases. If there's an ex parte request, those are not imaged right away. And so there's delays that are there also. And we're trying to do various workarounds. The most important one is I tell everyone that you should email your briefs to the department. So at least we can read them ahead of time. And if I don't see a reply brief, I often will ask my research attorney or my clerk to call counsel to ask for it. Likewise on ex partes, if you don't email an ex parte to the court, no one's going to see it if it's anything that's on an emergency. So you need to take some proactive steps to get there. The other effect of the limitation has primarily been on trials. We had a gradual reopening, but since June, with the exception of trials, we're doing everything by Zoom, and we are doing everything. We're doing case management, law in motion, IDCs, we're doing small claims trials, we're doing civil harassment and domestic violence cases. We're doing all that stuff, and we're doing it entirely 100% by Zoom. There's no in-person in the civil side for anything whatsoever. The only in-person happening in this court are in criminal cases where a criminal defendant will not waive their right to be present. And that results in some in-person activities going forward. So we have all that. The only place where we're not doing trials right now, but we may, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, is unlawful detainers. It has a series of very specific rules going forward. We started doing civil trials in July, and so far we've had 5 preference cases start trial. 2 of them have gone to verdict, 1 settled, and 2 of them, actually 2 of them have settled, and 2 of them are ongoing. So that's where we are in trials. And the limiting factor, again, are the number of our clerks, because what we've had to do with our limited resources is we tell all the civil judges, you have 3 half-day slots where you have to move your law in motion, and anything that has to be on the record, that's the only time you have a clerk. If you're in trial, though, you're going to be in trial probably 4 days a week, and that's additional clerk demands. So we've had to limit the number of cases that can go to trial based on our availability of clerks. And that's a day-to-day and week-to-week analysis based on what's going on. We have some hope that when the schools start opening, and in Alameda County, the primary schools have permission to open if they jump through some additional hoops. And we hope when that happens, some of our clerks who have been out will be able to come back. It won't be a huge change, but it'll be a modest change. And of course, if we ever get to middle school and high school, that will help also. But that's kind of where we are. The challenge right now is how many cases we actually can get to trial and our staffing. But all of our civil judges are doing the law in motion, case management, and all the rest of that stuff.
So for both of you, what's the impact in terms of civil case backlogs? What was it like 6 months ago, and what does it look like now? Judge Austin?
Well, I would think that it would be worse than it really is. It's kind of interesting. We have a backlog. It's there. We had a giant one when we first opened up again. That was the biggest problem, because the logistics of rescheduling all of those cases that had been vacated, all those hearings vacated over a period of, it's about 2.5 months. We opened at the end of May for remote hearings. We had to reschedule all of the case management conferences, all of the law and motion matters, and then work them into existing calendars where other motions were already on and we were accepting for filings. And it was very difficult to get all that done, but we worked through that backlog pretty much. So that's all kind of taken care of. What's happened is we don't really have it in backlog in case management or in law and motion. But trials, there is a backlog, and it wasn't so much that we were shut down. I mean, all of the trials that were during the vacated period had to get moved, and then we didn't start doing trials again until middle of June. But there are a lot of cases being continued, and I think it's a lot of it is from the attorneys saying for a number of reasons. One of the main ones is they weren't able to get all the work done that they needed to do to prep the case up for a trial that was scheduled in July or August or some other time, and even the ones that are being scheduled now, they just can't get it done because the logistics of taking a bunch of doctor depots or whatever you have to do have been so difficult by doing it all by remote and get things done. And on top of, I guess I don't have to tell all the lawyers on here all that, but just getting all your medical records together, getting all the wage loss records with third-party subpoenas. When the places you're subpoenaed are closed down or their employees are not there. So nobody's around where those records are to go grab them. It's very difficult. So we're continuing a lot of trials. That's going to result, I think, along with some other factors, into pretty big backlogs coming up in the future, maybe next year. By the end of next year, it's going to be big, along with some other factors. And the main one is criminal trials and unlawful detainer. Criminal trials have been moving forward pretty well in our court too. They're all in person. So they've been moving on, and jurors are coming down and dealing with those. There's going to be a backlog though in some of the misdemeanor cases. Everybody's waiving time on a lot of those, and they're just kind of staggering out. And there's going to be a whole bunch of them that come due, I think, sometime next year. That's going to suck up all the jurors, as well as the unlawful detainer cases. Those we're about to start seeing a wave of those, and we're trying to gear up for them. But they're going to affect the unlimited civil departments, I think. We're going to be having to deal with quite a few. The commercial ones are already starting to come in. They're now, for the first time, October 1st, you can start filing those things. And we're thinking that some of those are going to end up with jury trial requests. And you could file under certain restrictions, even though the moratorium's there, residential as well. So we haven't seen those yet because the notice period is quite long under the current statute. So if the people have started noticing, they won't show up in court for filings until November or December.
Yeah, in Alameda County, it's fairly similar. In terms of leaving aside trials, we're mostly caught up. Over the summer, we had a pretty big backlog of small claims and civil harassment cases, and I think we're on top of that now. And we actually added an additional judge to the 2 that were doing those cases, and that's helped because Zoom for those kinds of cases, particularly when you need interpreters and the like, take a lot more time. So we needed another judge on that. The trials is where the impact is, and I agree with Steve that a lot of parties are asking for continuances because they couldn't complete their discovery. What I'm facing right now with the limitation of clerks is I have a number of civil cases that are stacked up that are basically waiting for a trial opening to come open. And that's where the backlog, and I imagine that's going to increase because when I've got 3 preference trials going on at the same time, which I have generally had the last couple months, there's not room to slip in a long civil trial. We hope to get some short ones in, and if some of the preference cases settle, maybe we'll get some other openings. But that's where we're stacking up, are those kinds of cases, not other kinds of cases. As far as unlawful detainers, I keep saying we're waiting for the tsunami to come in, and it's going to come in. Right now, because of our county moratorium, there are some very limited exceptions where an unlawful detainer case can be brought between now and March. So we expect to start seeing some, but we're not going to see an onslaught. But there's certainly, everything I've heard is there's a pent up demand that's out there. And whenever that opens up, I fear we may have civil judges doing unlawful detainer trials only for a while, because those are also statutory preference cases and they go ahead of everything else. But that wave is out there somewhere. You can kind of see the tip of the wave far off in the horizon. And as long as it isn't moving, we're feeling okay. But at some point, it's going to come streaming in, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I bet next summer. I bet they hit. I bet that's kind of where I'm thinking the wave's going to crash on the shore.
Yeah.
it's sometime around next summer.
That's what I'm planning to use my unused vacation.
Good plan.
Well, I want to get to trials in a moment, but before we go there, how has first case management and law in motion, how's case management changed with COVID-19?
I don't think it has. Basically, what we did before and we do now, the majority of case management conferences, we issue tentative orders and nobody shows up. You schedule scheduling orders. If somebody wants to be heard or if we need to talk to them, we send them out a Blue Jeans, which is our court's version of Zoom notice, and they appear online. And it's worked pretty smoothly, actually, the case management. That actually was the first thing we had up and running after the closures. So I think case management's worked pretty well. Parties know that if they have an emergency issue, if they have a discovery dispute, they email the clerk and we can get to them pretty quickly and set something up.
Yeah, our case management has worked well too. Again, we do it all on court call. And I think the attorneys were already used to doing court calls. So it's not anything new. So it's basically the same thing we had going before, except if you wanted to come down to court and skip the court call, you can't do that. I know it's difficult. There's a concern because of the fee. If you have a fee waiver, it's free. So if once your fee waiver is in place, you can get onto court call for nothing. But it still is a drain, especially on I think the kind of the smaller rear-ender kind of cases, and the plaintiff attorneys that their margins aren't that high on each individual case, but they do have a lot of cases. Some of the debt collection cases, I think, that have special appearances a lot. A lot of those kind of cases, it runs into a lot of money and it decreases the bottom line, I think, at the end of when you resolve the case. So we've been thinking and looking at ways to maybe start doing Zoom. Judge George does in probate, has a calendar where she has a big kind of case management type of calendar, and she does it with both Zoom and court call, and they've got the door open. So where they encourage everybody not to come in, but on some cases, somebody will be on court call, somebody will be on Zoom, and somebody will be in court live. And it's working. I think there's some problems with the technology and the sound from the three different, and there's kind of a delay, I think, between court call and Zoom. Zoom is quicker, so it's a little hard, but they're working through it. And I was just talking to her today. She was kind of selling me on that. So we may be looking into something similar in civil, especially once we get the doors open again. I don't know when that's going to be, but it would be nice to offer different methods.
Well, one nice thing about our using Blue Jeans is it's free.
Yeah.
People don't have to pay for it. We're using almost exclusively Blue Jeans. A couple judges still use court call, but most of us don't use it at all. I think Judge Lee in Asbestos does some hearings on court call, but almost all the other civil judges are just doing Blue Jeans.
Is law in motion pretty much the same, or has there been a significant change in law in motion?
No, it's the same. We issue tentative rulings, and if they contest, they get on Blue Jeans. I actually, in some ways, find the Blue Jeans law in motion hearings better than live because you have the focus that's there. There's no distance between the judge and the folks out in the audience. There's no noise in the courtroom, distracting attention. And I've also found, it's interesting to me, that the behavior of lawyers generally is better on Zoom or Blue Jeans. And maybe it's because you're right in somebody's face. It's a little harder to be uncivil when you're under those circumstances. I'm not sure. But I actually have found that law in motion Blue Jeans hearings have worked pretty well.
What about when you talk about law in motion? If you have these motions with very thick attachments, I always like to get the hard copy delivered because it was so difficult taking it over email. How are you dealing with that issue in law in motion where the papers are pretty thick and lots of exhibits?
Well, that's a real challenge because right now, unless you have special permission, you can't send a runner down here and bring documents to our chambers. What you can do, but it requires planning, you can mail stuff to the department and do that. And certainly on summary judgment motions or large motions, that is way easier. In our primitive electronic system, when you file a long declaration with 47 exhibits, it's not broken up. And so it's really a pain. If you go to exhibit WW in there, you could spend 15 minutes trying to find out where WW is. It's no fun. So I would encourage parties, particularly on summary judgment motions where there's a long lead time, mail a courtesy copy in so we can get that hard copy. You'll have a grateful court and staff that can look at the documents in real time. The same issue arises in trial. I ask parties in trial to send hard copy versions of exhibits, particularly voluminous exhibits that are there. It's way easier to manipulate.
What's law in motion like in Contra Costa, Judge Austin?
Ours is still is again on court call. So we've had law in motion through court call or in person before the COVID times, and so I think the attorneys are used to that. The court call seems to work pretty well. I think things are a little bit shorter on court call than they are when people are in person, and the attorneys are usually a little more direct. The one problem is if you need a court reporter, the audio on court call is not very good. And so it's hard for the court reporter to figure out what's being said. So I have to constantly tell people to slow down, to enunciate. I try to model the way I speak, so that people can speak the same way. But what happens is you don't kind of ramped up on an argument. If people start up and then within about 20 seconds they forget and start going on pretty fast, and it's hard for the court reporter. Because of that, what I've started doing, and I think some of the other judges are doing it too, if there's a court reporter present and there seems to be a problem, suggest that why don't we just stop the argument and we could do it on Zoom. And I've even entertained from attorneys, if they get together, they want to do it on Zoom instead. I'll just set up my law in motion is on at 9. I'll tell them to start up at like 10:30 or 11. I'll send out an invitation for them because Zoom works so much better with court reporter. The court reporter can actually see everybody, so they can watch the lips moving. They know who's talking just by visually. The sound quality is way better. The court reporters love it. So
How do you deal with a large exhibit problem, say a summary judgment motion that's 8 inches deep?
Well, we're still all paper. So we haven't got to the level yet where we have people down there scanning every single document. We're just all paper. So I've got all the papers here most of the time so I just open it up, and it's actually kind of better. I've got my whole, I do it back in chambers with I've got a background of my bench. So I look kind of like Brad when I do this. So wait a second, I did the wrong thing. So I've got a virtual background where I do this. So I put my robe on and I'm sitting in the same seat, but it looks like I'm out in court, and it actually works really well. I've used it in court trials, and when I do law and motion hearings, we do it, and I think it changes people's behavior. It's like that reminds you that you're in court rather than being back here in chambers with my robe on and hearing something. So I kind of like it.
I was doing that when I was at home also, but I've been back in court, and I got kicked out because I lost the battle for bandwidth at home. So I came to court, and it's kind of interesting. In our court, if there's more than one person in the room, we all have to wear masks. So when I do my hearings, my clerk is somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I like to say that I'm in the courtroom in my magnificent isolation. But it is, going back to your comment earlier, Steve, it is totally weird. I'm sitting in this completely empty courtroom with a bunch of monitors. I've got 3 monitors in front of me right now.
Yeah.
One for Zoom, one for my either real time or my law and motion, or my email, and a third one for my public access. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And I feel like I'm like one of these intercontinental ballistic missile tracking stations where I got all the things out there. It's very weird.
Yeah, you're all by yourself.
Yeah,
in a silo someplace.
Yeah,
it is difficult. The thing that's good about Zoom too, when I have the hearings, my clerk, because we have the same rule, if it's more of us, one of us in the room, we got to have a mask on. But if I'm in here with the door closed, all I have to do is have the clerk link into Zoom, and then they hear the whole thing. Right. And so they have that. If you do that though, public access is kind of a problem. And the way we address it is, we'll get the floor bailiff deputy to be out there, and we'll open the door. And then I've got my laptop on my desk, turn it to the audience. And then if anybody wants to walk in, they can watch it on Zoom too. So that works out. I got the microphone up, and it actually works pretty well. We had somebody do that during one of my court trials. We're getting a public Zoom number though, so that anybody could listen in at any time. And that's should be up in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think someone had a question about that. What we have here, if you go to our website and you're in the public, there's an audio feed for any hearing that happens. And that's our public access. We don't give out Zoom numbers or anything like that because we're worried about Zoom bombing or anything, or people coming in and disrupting the hearings. But all of our proceedings are available for audio. If the media wants to get something more, they have to follow the process and make a request, using the rule of court form for media access. But for the general public, if you click on the Zoom link, on the audio link that's on our website for a particular department, you should be able to hear the hearing.
Judge Carvill, Gary Sanders here. A couple questions have come in. In general, everyone, big applause for the idea of using more Zoom than court call. Judge Austin, there's a question here specifically. Why does Department 57 not have telephone or Zoom capability? Maybe it's a task to take on later, but that's a specific question.
Well, that's interesting. We've had that question before. And guess what? This is bringing up something else I want to say. We're about to issue new local rules. I just reviewed the last one. We're in our 7th new emergency local rule. Every time it changes, we do it. And that's going to be addressing Zoom or telephone appearances in Department 57 and in the other commissioners' departments, both in Richmond and Walnut Creek. So it's going to deal with that. There's going to be access through that. There's some notice requirement that goes along with it in order to set it up. It's just really difficult in those calendars that have almost everybody there is self-represented. It's so hard to manage, and that's why we haven't done it. But it'd be much better, especially with our thought that there's going to be a lot of unlawful detainer cases coming in, and I think it's much better if we could do remote appearances. So we've got, so look and check. You should check at least once a week because we're changing it about once a month or so, the local rules and something in some area in response, because we're all doing this on the fly. Something will come up and the rules will change. So be sure to take a look.
Judge Carvill, on a related note, more questions about, I'll try to group them together. One is, how do these online limitations affect the access of the public and the press to the courts? And then, though it was just addressed, what about the dress code for appearing virtually in your respective courts on these virtual systems?
Well, those are two important topics, and I know Judge Seligman at least has some comments on the second one. But before we get to dress code, why don't I think you're going to make some comments, Judge Seligman, about public access in Alameda.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, there is audio access right now. Now, I will confess, when we first got up and running, dealing with all the various technologies, it was choppy. I think we've gotten better about doing it, but audio is available for hearings, and if for some reason you're not getting it, email the clerk and we'll get on as soon as possible. It's to some extent, it's a staffing issue. Like in my department, I have a computer laptop over here, which is the on and off switch for public access. And I've gotten pretty good at remembering to hit it, but I have to confess, when I first started with the 27 other things going on, I didn't always remember to hit that button. But I think we're learning how to do that more. I've had media requests, and I think a couple other judges have had media requests to be able to actually watch the visual, and those are dealt with on an individual basis. They have to have a request to do it, and there's a separate issue, which is under our local rules, you cannot record, whether it's the audio or the visual. And that, I know I've had at least one case where the media asked permission to record. So that's dealt with in a normal procedure going forward.
We have public access through all the court calls, so all the calendars and law in motion and case management conferences. There's a phone number up on our website. So every department has a link that's up on the website. Public can click on that and they can listen. It's a muted line. They can listen to everything that goes on the court call line. So they can hear everything that basically happens in the court. Be sure, I know this, I've had it happen like 3 or 4 times. An attorney will, maybe their assistant or someone gives them the number to call in on court call, or they check themselves. They don't realize it's the muted line court call and not the real court call. So they call in and then I call a case and they start trying to announce, but they're on the public muted line. They're not on the real line. And it gets very frustrating for them as we're talking about, well, hey, where's this guy? I thought he was going to be on. I don't know. And I'm here, but nobody can hear because they're on the public muted line instead. So if that should happen to you, check just in case. You might be on the public muted line.
Well, let's move on to trials. A brave new world of virtual trials. How's that going in Alameda, Judge Seligman?
Well, before I answer that, let me answer the second question you answered.
Oh, yes.
About dress code. And I have to confess, I used to be known as the worst dressed person in the East Bay. So I have, this is the pot calling the kettle black. But particularly when we started, people were dressing and presenting in a way that I thought probably undermined their professional image in many ways. They weren't wearing ties. They weren't dressed properly. It had backgrounds that were extraordinarily messy, bedrooms, things like that. And what you have to realize is that's what we're seeing. That is what we're seeing. And I would encourage everyone to treat a Zoom appearance with the same seriousness as if you're in court. Same thing I say to jurors. And that doesn't mean you have to put on a tuxedo, but it does mean that it's business attire is what's appropriate. And pay some attention to what your background is. If you can do it, put on a virtual background. That controls it. Do what Judge Austin does. If you can't, at least remove the clutter or the messiness that might be there, because it all affects how you appear. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, the clothing thing, I think everybody's got to cut on to that, and they're dressing more like they would dress in court. I mean, you don't have to be absolutely, I think, the same way you would if you were here. You don't, I mean, if you don't have your suit coat on, it's not a big deal if you're from the home. But you probably should, you know, wear a tie, wear business successful if you're a woman. You should do that because you want to be looked at professionally when you're on the phone with on the Zoom with the judge. The other thing is make sure that your lighting and sound are good. Lighting, sound, and angle of the camera, that all those are good. I've had so many cases where I see just the top of somebody's head, or you're looking up their nose, and it just is not a way to persuade people. So you could just get on ahead of time and take a look at it, or just on your computer. I'm sure you could take a look. They have different kind of things with, like if you're going to take a photo, it'll show up what it looks like, and you can check the lighting ahead of time and make sure that's okay. And there's an audio check on Zoom. You can check on that too. Make sure your sound's all right too.
Yeah, if you're in front of a window behind you and the shade's open, you're going to be in darkness. So close the shade, maybe get a screen, that helps. Now, my nightmare story for you all, and we've all done it. You say, okay, well, I heard what you said, Judge Seligman. I'm wearing my shirt and tie, but it's a hot summer day, I got shorts on. Nobody's going to see my shorts, right? My bad story is a million years ago. I was interviewed by a reporter, and I said, "You're just going to show me chest up, right? Right, right? Yes." And so did the interview. I turned on TV, and there's a word starts with an A and ends with hole. Whatever the word is. He reached down to get my shorts in that picture. The other example, though, is I've seen on Law in Motion, yeah, I don't see you until you stand up at the end of the hearing and move away, then I see your shorts. So just be aware that if you're only half dressed, that may be what we end up seeing is the half dressed. So a little side on that one.
Yeah, and sometimes too, especially if you've got an iPad or a laptop or something that's not stationary, it'll get knocked or moved or something during the course of the hearing, and you'll see other things that you might not want to see.
I would just add that all these comments about court apply to mediations and arbitrations. All the providers, be it JAMS, ADR, or some of the solo providers, all have similar stories of most people are professional and treat it, you know, they dress up and are sensitive to these issues, but there are always people who just don't get it. And it really detracts from the mediation or the arbitration in the same way. So if you're doing anything virtual, you know, you have to treat it as if you were going to a formal meeting and be sensitive to lighting, sound, all that.
You know, if I could add something on that too, it's also not just you as the attorney. If you're going to have either settlement conference or mediation, your client or your adjusters in a separate location, it's good to make sure that their systems are all working right. Their sound is good. The picture quality is good. They're dressed well. A lot of the adjusters are working from home, and I'm getting these on the settlement conference. I can't even believe where they have to work. And you know, it's not in a good setting, and it doesn't work that well. I'm getting clients or witnesses. I had one the other day, and it was a guy that puts the piece of tape over the camera because he thinks people are looking at him all the time. And so we got it going, and he had taken the tape off so that he could use his system, but it was all covered with that sticky stuff that comes from the tape. So he looked like he was in the witness protection program. It was just all blurred, and it was terrible. And nobody checked it out before. So it's good, you know, take that extra little step. There are things we never thought about before in a million years, but it really helps a persuasive message, and it helps the judge be able to process and makes you look good.
So jury trials, how's voir dire going on Zoom, Judge Seligman?
You know, it's been an interesting learning process, and I think we've gotten better at it. You know, one of the frustrations of being a judge, of course, is we don't talk publicly about what's going on. We just read what other people say about what's going on. I actually think that the jury selection process has gone pretty well, given the large numbers of individuals involved. Let me sort of describe step by step what we are now doing and what we've learned to do. We have folks come to court exactly one time for the initial jury assembly. We only have 2 jury assembly rooms that are large enough for social distancing in our court. So it's either in Oakland or it's in our Dublin Echo J courthouse where they have large rooms. Because if you enter our courthouse, social distancing and masking rules strictly apply. You're met when you get to security. You have to answer a health questionnaire to make sure that you don't have a cold or you don't have a fever or anything like that. Then we have them come in the jury assembly room, and there's 2 things we do as quickly as we can. We do the general introduction and the spiel that I do. Counsel introduce themselves, and we distribute, if we're using a questionnaire, and we distribute a hardship form. And as soon as people fill that out, they get out of there. And that's the last time they come there. I also have them fill out a form, which I call an appearance form, where I ask them, do you have access to the internet at home and a place where you can listen undisturbed? That's box 1. And box 2 is, if you don't, check that box. Some judges have those questions on the jury questionnaire, but we collect that information. And every piece of paper you fill out has an email address put on it, so we have a way of contacting you. What we found so far, and much to my surprise, is the vast majority of people do have internet access and equipment, a much higher level. We were deeply concerned about the digital divide. My first jury that I did this way, after we did hardships, we had a pool of 69 jurors. 65 of them said yes to question number 1. 4 of them said no, but it turned out that one of them got selected and said, you know what, I do have internet access. I just said I wanted to come to court. So we ended up having everybody accessible that way. So the first step, they show up, then they go away. We do all the hardships on paper, and if we need additional information, we email and ask for questions. It's usually somebody says I have a vacation, and we'll email, say what date or something like that. We do all the hardships that way. Then once we get to a reasonable size pool, we do the actual jury selection, and we use Zoom for the trials, not Blue Jeans, because you can see more people. We do the jury selection that way, and it's kind of the same as anything else. We do, most of us do 6-pack. So what we will do is the first 18 people on the list will get their name and a juror number, and they'll float to the top of the screen. And we'll do the same thing you do in voir dire. The parties will each ask their questions. Then when they've finished that round of questioning, we go to a sidebar, which is a separate room, Zoom room, quote unquote, where counsel will raise any cause challenges or peremptory challenges. You keep doing that till you get down to 11 jurors. You need to refill the box. You go out. The clerk calls a number, another 8 names. They get in there. They get questioned, and you keep going until you're done. And actually, it wasn't too bad. Now, with any juror pool that deals with a large cross-section of individuals, you get a large cross-section of individuals. In Zoom, as in real life, you have people who don't behave well. You have people who don't want to be on the jury no matter what happens, and they will say and do anything to get off that jury. And then you have people who have a strong sense of citizenship. So we had all types. We had people who said anything they could to get off the jury. We had one case where somebody was on a treadmill, never got in the box. We had one case where somebody was in their bed, never got in the box. It was not an extraordinary amount. I actually, having gone through a 2-month trial, found that the jurors' attention and seriousness rivaled or surpassed any other trial I've ever done. I thought that they worked very hard, and given the realities that you're attending from your home and you're attending in a place where there inevitably will be some interruptions, they did the best they possibly could under the circumstances. The single biggest problem I personally thought we had was with PG&E, who decided to work on the electrical lines outside of one of my jurors' house. So he lost connectivity constantly until we finally had to excuse him from the jury. I had jurors, they're working at home. Some of them have children. Big surprise. And they acted appropriately. I remember at one classic moment in which one of the jurors was sitting there and I'm the juror and did this. And clearly what that juror was saying to whoever, what little kid, as my guess, walked in the room was, go away, which was the right thing for that juror to do. The other story, and this is my favorite trial objection in history, is objection juror number 8 has a cat on her lap. And I'm still looking in the Code of Civil Procedure what objection that is, but I don't think I have control over pets. So that's sort of our jury selection process.
Nothing's going in Contra Costa. You're doing virtual trials or not?
Well, we haven't had any virtual jury trials. We've had one couple of week-long jury trial that was in person, though. Judge Weil did one just recently. It's not like your jury trial that you would think of from your past. It's a kind of a bizarre system when you do it in person. Similar, we could put 50 in the jury assembly room, but only 20 in the courtroom. And so everybody's got masks on. They're all checked when they go through the metal detector. They assemble in the jury room with the masks on. If there's a jury questionnaire, they'd fill it out there and be hardship there. The ones that don't have any hardship or some obvious cause situation, they end up being told to come back the next day and then report outside the courtroom. We have a pretty big area on the 3rd floor up here where jurors can kind of stay out of each other's way. So it's nice. So you end up getting about, 40 of them that end up coming back, or 35. There's plenty of places to have 20 in the courtroom and 15 outside for that they could sit. And there's nobody in the hallways here. So it's a lot easier. So then you just do similar. Everybody's in the courtroom, you do voir dire. Everybody's got masks on. The attorneys all have masks on. The judge has a mask on. Court reporter got a mask on. The clerk, everyone in the courtroom has a mask on. And they did the voir dire through the mask. So, which is interesting.
Do you use a jury box or do you spread them out somehow?
They're all spread out. As I said before, my courtrooms, all the courtrooms are set up so they have the chairs that people can sit in are the only ones that don't have a piece of paper on it and say, don't sit here or something like that. So there's about 3 in the jury box, and then everybody else spreads out all through the gallery. The other, it'd be 17 of them. And you're able to do that safely or, within the social distancing rules. How safe it is, who knows? We all have pretty old air refreshing systems. So with a lot of people in the courtroom, and our windows don't open very well. So, hopefully it is. But everybody's got masks on. They did the whole trial. He did a 2-week trial. Everybody wore a mask, including the witnesses. They wore a mask too. We have also in the criminal trials that are going on, it's happening a lot. They have little bubbles for the judge, little plastic bubble, and little bubble for the witness stand. But the witnesses still are wearing the plastic shields and kind of tuck in underneath. So you still have a little bit of filter coming through the bottom. That would be fine too, I'm sure. It didn't happen in Judge Weil's trial. Everybody wore masks and nobody objected. And then deliberations, that's a big problem too, because you can't put all the jurors in the jury room. And I don't know how the virtual jury room gets done, but what happened to us was we have one of the courtrooms is empty. So we used that as a jury room. So they all went down there. The bailiff stood outside and they were inside the jury room and deliberated, or inside the courtroom and deliberated there.
With the dispersed jury, some in the box and others in the audience and everyone wearing masks, has that changed voir dire, or are people having a hard time hearing the witness? Are there any unusual problems you have to deal with a dispersed jury?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. It's really hard to figure out which one's which, what number the person is. We have them in seats, so we know what number they are in order in the 6-pack, but it's still very difficult to figure out as you move along. Be like the first couple in the first row of the gallery would probably be juror number 4 and 5, and then the next one's 6, 7, 8, and then in the row behind. But it's still very difficult to know exactly which juror is next up, who they are in terms of your list of jurors and the questionnaires they filled out. It's a hard thing. It takes about twice as long as normal jury selection takes, and it probably is the same way virtually. It probably takes you quite a bit of time.
It's actually easier virtually than to do
Oh.
it that way. Because I started with the juror selection in the courtroom with limited number of individuals in and out. We had sound system problems. We had problems being able to see everyone, complaints about masked jurors, a lot of issues. Once we went completely virtual, it went in many ways more smoothly. And I should say, the jurors uniformly liked the Zoom trials more than coming to court. At least
sure
in the
that'd be the
public
case.
process. Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't have to commute anywhere. They don't have to risk their lives to go anywhere.
Yeah.
They're comfortable at home.
Yeah, witnesses would like it better too, I'm sure.
I think that's been generally true also, particularly, if you got a case where you have experts around the country, it's a lot cheaper to have them on Zoom than to fly them in. So, I mean, there are some economies that parties could take advantage of in this process.
I've been trying hard to get a jury, and I want to do it with a Zoom jury. I'm meeting some resistance from the attorneys. They're not all that looking forward to it. Because we were all a little conservative, I think, in the way that we approach and the way we do things.
That's
It's hard to get
right.
used to something new like that, I think.
Until you do it one time. It's kind of like when you're a brand new lawyer, until you've done that first hearing, it's the most scary thing you've ever done in your life.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Zoom hearings. We all had to learn. All of us had to learn, and we're still learning to remember to hit the unmute button when you do these things. But once you've actually gone through it, I had a 2-month-long trial, and by the end of the trial, everyone's pretty sophisticated, I thought. And I'm sure all those lawyers and parties and witnesses, the next trial, they'll be that much better. But it's a change, and we recognize that it does take longer. Jury selection is longer than what it used to be way back when. There are some delays in examining a witness, and here's a good example of that. I think most of our judges require that exhibits be exchanged several days before the witness goes on the stand. So you don't have to waste any time on that. That works except for impeachment documents. Impeachment documents, you don't want to exchange in advance. And so what we do for impeachment documents is when the cross-examination gets started, the party doing the examination will email the documents to the court and opposing party. And if they're permitted to use it, they then get emailed or transmitted to that witness. Now that leads to delay. It's a slow, cumbersome process.
Yeah.
It also emphasizes the point that I think you were making, I think it was Steve was making, or Judge Carvill, I don't remember, that you need to prep your witness to make sure that they have the equipment and they're ready to do it. Because if in fact they don't have the equipment to accept an email document and open it while they're on Zoom, no one's ever going to see it.
Yeah.
It's a slower process. It does work, but it takes a little preparation.
Yeah. People getting used to it. I know we're going to talk about court trials. I had a lengthy court trial that was on Zoom, but we started the first week it was in person. So we had the mask, the court reporter had the mask. I had interpreters, they had masks. There was a big mess, and we couldn't hear anybody. The witness had to sit in the jury box because the jury box is too close in my department to me. And the court reporter had to sit off to the side because she would have been too close to the attorneys. Passing a microphone around, and it was just too hard for everyone to hear everybody. And after about 3 or 4 days, I said, that's it, we're going to do this by Zoom. And the attorneys were resistant, but we started by Zoom the next week. And within a few days, they loved it. And at the end, we went on for about a month. I did it every afternoon. And at the end, they said how much they were impressed with it and they really enjoyed it. It's great too, as for the trier of fact, even with the jurors, I know as a judge looking at it, I usually see when I have a court trial, I just see when the witness is testifying, I see the side of his face like this.
Right.
So it's hard for me to know, judge credibility and other things. On Zoom, you have a face that's bigger than the regular face and it's looking right at you. And so it really is helpful in looking at their expressions, how they present themselves, the credibility issues. And I think it's helpful for jurors too. I think the same thing, because they're much closer to the face that they're looking at and trying to weigh their credibility.
Yeah, I think that is true. There was some concern that on a Zoom trial, the jurors wouldn't be able to see the full body. of somebody. They don't really see a full body anyway when they're in a witness tent, because there's a barrier that covers usually in front of the witness anyway. But
Yeah.
you're closer on Zoom. I think it actually is in some ways better than live.
And it's pretty easy with the documents too. I found with using the shared screen, you just turn over control to the attorney. You got to make sure, I would think in a jury trial, that all exhibits, they've gone over them ahead of time. They know what's going to be admitted and what's not. So you publish it to the jury. But in mine, it was court trial. It didn't matter. It's just me. So either it excludes or it doesn't exclude. And so they put the documents up. I had hard copies left over from when we started with me. So I'd be able to go through the hard copy, and if I couldn't see the whole thing very well, but I could see it just fine most of the time.
With exhibits, do you use a split screen so you have both everyone's face is still there, but the documents on the split screen?
Yeah, and that works fine. Their head's not as big, but you can still see them pretty well.
Yeah, likewise, for opening and closing statements, people put PowerPoints up in the split screen. So that works too.
What about both on the Zoom and if you have in court, but there's social distancing and masks, what are the challenges with interpreters? I would think it'd be very difficult and challenging in both forums.
It's been very challenging, particularly for our small claims and civil harassment calendars and domestic violence. It depends what technology. We have a thing called Bridge, which allows simultaneous translation. And if we have that, and our regular interpreters have it, it works reasonably well. If you don't have it, though, it's not simultaneous. It is consecutive, which really slows the process down. So if you've got interpretation, that adds 50% time-wise, I would guess, at least. It slows it up.
I had interpreters in that court trial that I had. And once we got on Zoom, it was much easier than we were in court. Although it just turned out that the week of that we were live, that was when the individual who spoke Spanish was testifying. So that's when it was best to have the interpreters there. It just worked out that way. But after that, the person was just listening in and on Zoom. And so they're able to do it in a way on Zoom where there's an interpreter feature where the interpreter can just talk directly to that person. And so the feed that they hear is the interpreter feed, and they can hear the other stuff too, but they hear the interpreters talking to them. And none of the rest of us hear the interpreters. So it's a nice system that they have.
Judge Austin, one of the things I'm curious about when you're doing the trials with masks and social distancing, I've always been told that both interpreters and court reporters, they not only want to hear, but they want to see the lips. How do court reporters and interpreters work with people wearing masks? I would think it would be a real challenge for both the interpreters and the court reporters.
It was difficult when we had that. It was about 2 days of testimony. It was very difficult for the interpreters. But we made it through. It's hard for the interpreters too, because they're trying to talk through the mask they have that little system that then goes to an earphone on the witness. And I think that system didn't work all that well with the mask on either. It's very hard for the court reporters too, because everybody is kind of garbled a little bit, just enough that it makes it more difficult for the court reporters to take things down.
In the Zoom context, are there special interpreter reporter issues, Judge Seligman?
I mean, the issue is making sure you have an interpreter who has the equipment to do simultaneous interpretation, which it usually means the interpreter has to have their own phone, which is connected, so they can talk on their phone separate from the Zoom feed. That's important. I completely agree with Judge Austin that for court reporters, if they can see the witnesses and without masks, it makes it an awful lot easier, which is, again, why I think a fully Zoom trial in some ways has an advantage over sort of these hybrid kinds of situations.
Yeah, the single happiest person when we switched my trial from in court to on Zoom was a court reporter, who also got to take care of her little new puppies that were at our house during the course of the trial. And it kind of lightened things up as well a little bit during the trial for all the parties.
You didn't have an objection to puppies in the courtroom?
Well, they were at our house, so that's okay.
In the virtual courtroom,
Virtual courtroom.
Judge Carvill, a couple questions have come in, if I may. One specifically for Contra Costa, and then the other question for both judges. Regarding Contra Costa, a question about when the county starts really handling the unlawful detainer cases, will the commissioners be given the option to be able to use court call or Zoom? There's a feeling now that that service is not available for those commissioners. And I'll say the next question for, and it's just general, will ADR options be made more available for the audience, let's say today in both counties? And can you comment on that subject? But first,
as to the unlawful detainers, again, our local rules are changing. I don't have them right up here, the new way, but they're set up in a way, as I understand it, so that you're going to be able to have Zoom trials. I think it's going to be on the agreement of the parties. So if one party wants to come in, then I think they're both going to have to come in. But if the parties agree, I think we'll be able to have that set up. They're going to have Zoom capabilities, court call capabilities within the next week, I think, depending on when the new rules publish and we get the technology to them. But it's relatively quickly, it's all going to happen.
In terms of ADR, our settlement unit, which is in Alameda, we have 3 judicial officers on it. They're doing all the mandatory settlement conferences by Zoom, or by Blue Jeans, actually, what we're using, and it apparently is working pretty well.
We're doing all of our settlement conferences by Zoom, and I just love it. It's better. Judge Fannon's doing she has 2 computers. They brought her a different computer, so she could do 2 settlement conferences at the same time on Zoom, which is really funny. She's got a chair with wheels, and she'll go back and forth between the settlement conferences. Because they don't know, it's weird. You guys have all done it probably, but the judge or the mediator pops in and out of the breakout rooms. You're like on Bewitched, like Andorra pops up behind Darren. All of a sudden I'm there and it surprises people, and then you pop back out again. So should you do that between the 2, and they don't know what room she is or what case she's on, and she's able to do real well. I just love the experience of doing it. You get a lot. There's a couple of things that happen. I get more of a direct contact with the adjuster than I do if the adjuster's sitting here with the attorney, kind of in the way of the adjuster or playing defense a little bit. I'm able to see the reactions because oftentimes they're in different whole towns, states. And so I'm able to see directly at the same time as I'm talking the reaction of the adjuster in a way that you can't really do in person. I think that's been really helpful. You can establish almost a better relationship with the adjuster that way. At the same time, the plaintiffs, usually I don't talk to the plaintiffs during settlement conferences until maybe at the end, because I'm kind of afraid that I'll say something that and we've got the weird county here. I'm the trial judge and I'm doing the settlement conference. So I try to make sure that doesn't cause a problem. But I've had a little more contact since we've been doing this, and I really enjoy that too. And it's been helpful in settling cases, I think, in a lot of them.
In the private mediation section, I know I speak for more than JAMS, but a lot of people who do this, where you have a plaintiff who may have a very, maybe it's sexual harassment or something else that's sensitive, having the plaintiff at home in a comfortable place relaxes the plaintiff and enhances their ability to participate, and for the neutral to communicate with that person who may be very intimidated by going to an office building or a courtroom or whatever. It can really help in some cases, particularly with a plaintiff who is in a very emotionally charged situation. So I'm sure the settlement unit over in Alameda has found some cases it really makes it better, given, again, it could be a defendant who's charged with sexual harassment or something similarly upsetting. It's good to have them in a more comfortable setting.
I think everybody's more comfortable. I think the attorneys are too. Um, it's a little less formal, and I think it works better on Zoom than it does in person. That's going to be something that's going to be here to stay, I think. A lot of these new technology things are going to be here to stay because as we're kind of been forced into this world, we've realized that they actually work better than what we were doing before.
Have you noticed any changes in the behavior of counsel in either the situation in Contra Costa where people are wearing masks and social distancing, or Alameda where they're on Zoom? And would you have any advice to counsel on how to better manage those different, again, in Contra Costa, there it may be live, but social distancing with masks. In Alameda, they may be on Zoom. How's it affected counsel, and what tips can you give attorneys to how to deal with that environment better? Judge Austin, what
I
about?
think it's not easy if you're in here and you're doing a trial with a mask on. And you have to accept the fact that it's not going to be like your normal trial. It's going to be different. You're going to have to be much more organized, I think, than even you would normally be. The exhibits turn into a big problem because if you have a whole big binder of exhibits, the witness has a really hard time, and you can't approach the witness to find which exhibit it is. That I saw that was a real problem during my time. And talking to Judge Weil, he said the same thing, that the big binders don't work very well that you usually have, and you're able to go up and help the person find which exhibit is the witness. You can't do that because you got to stay 6 feet away from each other. So you have to think through all the different areas where you might end up having blowing the 6 foot limit. And so how can I stay in this bubble and still do this trial? Using, if you're going to do it, using things virtually is a great plan. If the witness could have an iPad or a screen, and there could be a screen that publishes to the jury rather than having hard copies of exhibits, that's a great idea. I know that's an expense, but we all have the capability of having a projector from a laptop in all of our courtrooms. So you just have to have one that the witness would be able to have, and the rest of us could do it on hard copy if we had to. That's one way. Your voice doesn't project as well. Imagine arguing when you have a mask on to a jury with masks on, and they're all sitting all over the place. So you're kind of like singing in theater in the round. You gotta remember, you're not just looking at the ones there, you're looking at the ones behind too. Judge Weil said they were kind of spinning around quite a bit, trying to make sure that they're making eye contact and getting contact with everybody. And it's hard to figure out what's going on in the juror's mind because they're all masked. It really does make a difference when all you can see is eye and body language, in trying to figure out if you're getting through to them or not. Same way with witnesses. It's difficult if they have the mask on. So just be prepared that it's going to be a difficult thing. I think that arguing, getting very confrontational with witnesses on cross-exam doesn't work very well when you have a mask on. It just looks silly. So it's not going to work. You got to be kind of straightforward and ready to go. Remember, the jurors don't want to be here even less than they didn't want to be here before. And so as direct as you could be, the better.
Judge Seligman, in terms of Zoom, observations on counsel behavior or advice?
Well, as I mentioned before, I actually think people generally behave better on Zoom than in court. The main advice is, I go back to Marshall McLuhan. Television is a cool medium. Being very emotive and dramatic when you're looking at a screen that's right in front of your face is not as effective. Sort of the old style of stem winder kind of speeches to the jury in a closing, I don't think that works so good. I would say more of a conversational approach is more effective. It's sort of rethinking how you're doing things. It's an interesting comment that Judge Austin said about cross-examination. I've seen some good cross-examinations, but they're a little different. They're not quite as confrontational. You don't have the ability of controlling the timing when you're on Zoom in the same way in court, because it's slower getting to exhibits and moving your way through. So you don't have some of those tricks that folks might have done in cross-examination. So you have to think it through. You really do need to think through, particularly on direct examination, with your witnesses and prep them so they know how to work with the Zoom, how to work with exhibits, and what the rules of the game are. And likewise for their testimony, they need to understand they're on TV too, that affects how they're going to be going forward. So it's a different style, I think, for some people. And you know, there's some lawyers who already have a conversational style, and it works very well for them. If you're not that kind, you might want to try practicing on Zoom with a friend or in another office just to see how it looks and get your feedback on how it looks going forward.
I think another thing about the Zoom trials that I noticed, and I don't know if you noticed as a jury with a jury trial, in a normal jury trial, the jurors have a lot of time where they come in contact with the parties and the attorneys, either in the hallway, even though there's nobody talking or anything. They see the person, they see the people sitting in court every day, and they're right just a few feet away from them. And over a long trial, you get perceptions of that person, maybe develop sympathies for the plaintiff or for the defendant. I've had it gone both ways. And in ways that aren't just from the testimony. When you're on Zoom, there's the time when that person testifies or when the attorney's speaking, but the rest of the time, they're just little pictures. They're just little squares. And you don't have that, the other, like the penumbra of stuff that goes along with being in a courtroom and the perceptions that people form, even involuntarily, I think, in that setting. And I don't think that can happen in a Zoom trial as well. I don't know.
But it also affects how the jury is. You know, when you have an in-person jury trial, the jurors get to know each other during the course of the trial.
Yeah.
Break. They're in the jury room hanging out. They're often eating meals there and the like. Here, when court's not in session, you're nowhere. you're in the waiting room and there's nobody to talk to. And until the end of the case, you actually may never have a conversation with any of your jurors. We do deliberations virtually. That's the first time the jurors get to talk to each other. And you know, there were some procedures, we had some rules we laid out so it would work well. But literally, you know, after a 2-month trial, the first time people got to say, "Hi, how are you?" was jury deliberations. So it's a different process.
That's hugely different.
Yeah.
Judge Carvill, a couple of questions here for both courts about scheduling. One is, are the courts using referees under the procedures more often now to help with the backlog? And in Alameda County especially, a question about will individual judges have any ability to set cases for trial and say that trial date is firm?
Okay, well, for the first question, I don't think there's been any difference. We rarely use referees, and that's still true. Mainly occasionally in some complex cases where there's like a very challenging issue on ESI or something like that. I don't think there's any indication we're using it more now. With regard to individual judges can schedule trials, but we have there's limited clerk support. So basically, all trial settings, whether the trial actually goes or not, it comes through me, and I check with the clerk support to find out if we have people to do it. So an individual trial judge doesn't know when they set the trial what the clerk staffing is going to be. What is firm, though, and folks should bear this in mind, is whether or not the trial gets continued. You should not assume that if the trial gets continued, discovery is going to reopen. The discovery cutoffs, the deadlines for motions are there. And unless the court makes a specific ruling about it, you should assume that's your cutoff, even if your trial gets continued. So plan accordingly. Don't operate on the assumption, well, the case is just going to get continued, so I don't need to prep it. That would be a big mistake.
Do cases
I agree.
trail?
What was that?
Do cases trail?
Yeah, cases trail. And for how long, who knows?
Judge
What's the
Carvill?
situation in Cocoa County?
Well, I think similar. We get them. The trials dates are firm, If it ends up that it doesn't go out for some reason, you don't get a new discovery cutoff, and that's something everybody needs to know, that you don't get a do-over, and that just continues everything out. So if you got this, plus you got the issue conference statements, and those are all due. We do a lot of things to encourage people to really think about their case that much before trial and see whether or not they can get it settled. Because once everybody gets on the same wavelength, it's a lot easier to do.
Judge Carvill, another question for both judges. What is the potential, or is there potential for ADR processes to help with the growing backlog? If so, in what ways?
We're always looking for ADR help. So, and I know both Gary and Bob are over doing the mentor program constantly with us, and that's still moving on strongly. But we encourage just about every single case to go to some form of ADR or settlement conference. We haven't done like, have a big, everybody refers the cases over and have one giant week of settlement conferences for everybody or an ADR and have a system, an organized system. Like there was a couple times back in the day, I remember doing that when Judge Fanna's dad was here when I was practicing. We haven't thought about doing those kind of things, and maybe there's some way to do it virtually, but we really are encouraging everything to go through ADR. Our panel is up and running, and they're working like crazy. And that's the one where through the courts operated, first 2 hours are free. And that's very attractive, I think, to many people because we have a lot of really experienced mediators around that panel.
Yeah, I don't think it's different in Alameda. Even before COVID and currently, we encourage all forms of ADR and our case management conferences. We encourage it going forward. The main issue is until we started trials again, a lot of people weren't really focused on their cases. And it's only once we started trials, I think, that we've started having an uptick of productivity in our settlement conferences. So there is depending on the type of case, some kinds of cases will settle no matter what. But depending on the type of cases, having trials or the prospect of a trial going forward has a marvelous focusing effect in terms of settlement. And the ability to have cases go out is really, I think, critical.
We don't have a lot of time left. I'd just like to ask each of you one wrap-up question, and that is, where do you think your court will be a year from now? I mean, what changes will stick? What will a backlog look like? Where will we be a year from now? In Contra Costa County, what do you think?
Well, I'm hopeful that we'll be back getting to see people in person a lot more. Just depends what happens with the COVID. I don't know. I'm hopeful that that's the case, though, that we get a little bit more back to normal. I don't see social distancing leaving for quite some time. Even if things get back to normal, I would think that that's going to be in place. So some of the restrictions are going to have to all still stay. I'm very afraid of the cumulative effect of the minor backlogs. So the civil cases that are continuing now, because they haven't had a chance to do all the discovery because of the delays with COVID, are still on the books. In the meantime, new ones are coming in the door. And so what usually is we'd have the old ones leaving and the new ones, they kind of balance out. I have a fear that we're stacking up like Lucy and Ethel at the candy factory, that if there are more coming in, but we're not getting the ones in the boxes. And so, about a year from now, I think that could really hit, especially if the unlawful detainers end up with a lot of jury trials, or we just have so many court unlawful detainer trials that us up here on the third floor end up having to do a bunch of those. And the criminal misdemeanors, if they go haywire, which they might, we get drawn in to do some of those trials too sometimes, which affects civil as well, since civil doesn't have the priority. So I think we're doing okay, but I'm kind of leery about what's going to happen about a year from now when everything kind of hits.
Yeah, no, I would agree, particularly the unlawful detainer side of it, whenever that comes in. The other cumulative effect is the budget. Nothing's going to be good budget-wise for a while. And that has continuing effects on our staffing ability going forward. On the other hand, I think remote technology is here to stay. You know, it's funny, we talked about that in the Civil Advisory Committee for years and years. This whole futures commission process, remote, absolutely nothing happened. It required a pandemic to kick us in the butt to find out, hey, you know what? We actually can use this technology. There are challenges, but also advantages to using it. I think not that it will be necessarily mandatory, but I think remote will become a regular feature the way court call became a regular feature. That some cases will be entirely tried remote, some will have a mixture. You may have some witnesses on remote. I think you're going to see law in motion continue to do remote. Right now, we have an emergency local rule, but we're planning on adopting a permanent local rule that says you can use remote procedures. And there's statutory authority for that now. So I think that technology is going to be there. What nobody can predict, of course, is the course of the pandemic and when people can actually come to our courts again. We'd all love that. You know, it's kind of this weird kind of thing where I remember 100 million years ago, 7 months ago, when we actually had hearings in court, and they were kind of fun. I'd like to do that someday again.
I want to thank you both for giving us your time today. I think it's been helpful to hear how both courts are adapting to this unprecedented pandemic. And it's interesting to see the contrasts driven by your local situation. So I really appreciate you both appearing so we get that comparison of how two counties are dealing with the same set of problems in their own way. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wynne.
If we can open the mics and give our two panelists a round of applause, baby.
Thanks.
It's
Great.
It's an experience, the sound of one hand clapping. You know?
Thank you, judges. Very well done. Thank you very much for
Here.
Thank
Well, it
you.
takes a while to unmute.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.